big cup, and hello. Welcome to our new episode of the Gilmore Way podcast. I'm your host, Laura.
And I'm your host, Kate. And today we're going to be discussing the character of Max Medina, one of Rory's teachers at Chilton, and the first man we see Lorelai pursuing a romantic relationship with in the show.
But before we get started, we'd like to encourage you to go back and check out some of the first few episodes we've already done. Last week, we covered the topic of gifted students and the pressures they face. And the first two episodes we did before that were introductions to who we are, as well as highlighting a Gilmore Girls centered New England road trip we went on this summer.
We can also be found on Instagram if you'd like to see more from us. You can find us at Gilmore Way podcast at Gilmore Way Podcast on Instagram, and on Twitter at Gilmore Way Pod. If you'd like to stay on top of updates and news about our upcoming episodes, we also have photos posted to our Instagram from our Gilmore Girls inspired road trip to Harvard. Links to these social media accounts can be found in the video description below. And another way to reach us is by email at thegilmoreway@gmail.com. We'd also like to remind you that all of our episodes may contain spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
We're covering the show 22 years after it came out. So if you're watching this, we're assuming you've seen the show or are at least okay with spoilers. And if you haven't, please go do so immediately. Why have you waited so long? Go do it. Just go. Stop this video and go now.
Yeah. Or just watch after you're done with this video. That's cool too. We appreciate the support. But that being said, we're going to start with brief summaries of episodes 3 and 4 from season 1, and then we will jump right into our spotlight on the man of the next hour or so, Mr. Max Medina, who is portrayed in the show by Scott Cohen and seen in a total of 13 episodes, beginning with The Deer Hunters in season 1 and ending with Keg Max in season 3. But first, let's recap season 1, episode 3, Kill Me Now.
All right, episode 3 shows us Rory getting closer to her grandparents when she decides to take up golf as an extracurricular activity, and she ventures out to the country club with Richard. While golf ends up not being her forte, which is understandable, not my thing, she bonds with Richard, which triggers jealousy and insecurity in Lorelai, as she recognizes that Rory's familial scope starts going beyond her. Lorelai is also busy at work organizing a wedding for a set of twins who are marrying another set of twins.
It's not weird at all.
It's makes for good comedy. Mm-hmm. Suki is tasked with preparing soup and salad, blueberry shortcake because she can't find good strawberries, and every other imaginable dish. Drella continues to butt heads with Lorelai over what music is acceptable to play. Michelle confronts his fear of swans. And despite the challenges, the wedding proceeds without any glitches, aside from using post-it notes to distinguish between the grooms.
That's fair. Again, good comedy. In episode 4, Rory receives her first ever D on a paper, and Lorelai learns about it at a parent-teacher night from her English teacher, Max Medina. Lorelai helps Rory cram for a test on Shakespeare, but after studying late into the night, Rory oversleeps and misses her bus. As she's driving to school, a deer slams into the side of her mom's car, and she arrives late to her test. Mr. Medina doesn't allow her to take the test, which causes Rory to have a meltdown. Lorelai is then called into Headmaster Charleston's office and has a similar meltdown. She reassures Rory that it's okay if she doesn't want to continue at Chilton if it's too stressful, but Rory is determined to persevere. The Gilmore Girls return home to a message on their answering machine from Mr. Medina, who informs Rory that he's convinced Headmaster Charleston to allow her to do extra credit to make up for the missed test. And Max ends the voicemail with a flirtatious comment directed at Lorelai.
You got hit by a deer?
No. Well, yes.
So good.
You hit a deer? No, I got hit by a deer.
I love how nobody understands it but Lorelai, and she doesn't even question it.
Yeah, she's like, no, that just happens.
And then they go, like, pan to outside. You did. You got hit by a deer. Oh, that's so
Yeah,
great.
the dog ate my homework, but it's really true this time.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, but like, you know, focusing in on the Max of it all. You know, this is where they first meet. So, you know, it's this parent-teacher evening where he's talking about these big tests for the kids, and it's immediately obvious that there's some interest or attraction, especially on Max's part. It's like, where do you think that comes from? Is it just physical attraction? Is it the B-52's t-shirt? Is it just Lorelai's charm? Like, what do you think drew him to her?
I've given this a lot of thought because there seemed to be fireworks right away, but why? You just met this woman, she's walking into your classroom, and I think some of the most basic tells are what isn't going to end up being true here. Lorelai is a beautiful young woman. At that point, Max doesn't know whether she's available or not, but she walks into the classroom with the B-52 shirt, which so shows an appreciation for culture. She's gorgeous. Again, just a very beautiful woman. Um, I also think Max is in a profession where he probably spends most of his time every single week and perhaps even on weekends with adolescents. He may not have the opportunity to be interacting with adults or people within his own age group aside from Chilton parents. And those Chilton parents are also probably taken, married, divorced, not looking for a relationship, whatever the case may be. So when Lorelai walks into the classroom and he's able to deduce fairly quickly through communication with her that she's actually single and available, I think it just stems from not having a lot of other options. But that's also not a good foundation to start building a relationship upon. So for that reason, and for other reasons that we'll talk about, it seems like this relationship was doomed to fail from the beginning. But I just think it was a lack of options for Max and not much else at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it was something I never really considered. I just always sort of thought that it was that Lorelai oozes charm, and, like, you can't help but be charmed by her, and not to mention just the attraction. Like, they obviously have great chemistry together, so I just sort of chalked it up to those simple, superficial things without sort of thinking about Max's life beyond school and beyond what we see of him and Lorelai.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that their relationship had any basis upon which it could have succeeded based on their initial react interactions, or do you just think, no, this is probably not good from the start? How
I
do you
mean,
think it was shown and filmed to us as an audience?
this is sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but no, I
Yeah.
don't think they had much of anything. I think it was just that sort of initial animalistic attraction that held them together because, you see as their relationship progresses that they don't have a ton in common. They don't seem to have any important conversations about their life or lifestyle or any of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they just don't communicate very well. They don't seem to spend a ton of time together to really build that foundation that you need to have that friendship and that special kind of intimacy that a relationship needs to survive. So we'll obviously break that down into pieces a little bit more as we continue through their arc together. But
Mm-hmm.
no, no,
Yeah.
there was really not much of substance there. And I think it was important for Lorelai to go through the experience because it seems like it's been a while since she's had a relationship like this. But I think it taught her what she really needed and what was missing. What
Mm-hmm.
about you?
Yeah, again, there are other things that we're going to talk about, other red flags and problematic things that were going on within this relationship that we're going to bring up. I didn't see this as something that was ever going to last. And if you were just paying attention to the nuances and the hints that were being dropped within the writing from the get-go, you could see that there was a lot of also forced compatibility here. And again, it was just a lack of options. These are two people within the same age bracket who are lonely, seeking companionship. Again, all things we're going to touch on as we go through their arc, but no, this was never going to work out.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page with that one. What about like that voicemail at the end of the Deer Hunters where,
Mm-hmm.
Rory's just gotten in trouble at school. She's freaking out because of this test and Max calls to offer some consolation and said he talked Charleston into some extra credit. Um what did you think of that email? Did you find it creepy? Did you find it endearing? Like what was your take on that?
I was a little put off by it. it's understandable that you're calling to inform Rory that she's able to do some extra credit to make up to the test. That's a very appropriate phone call for the teacher to be making. I think it's also important to remember that this was 2001, where cell phones were just coming into existence. Lorelai and Rory still had a shared landline, emphasis on shared, that they both made use of. So there was a very real probability that Rory was going to come home and be the first person to listen to this voicemail. And if that ends up being the case, she's going to catch this very flirtatious and just, yeah, he like Max wasn't even sugarcoating it. He was being very open and honest with his intentions, and that comment at the end of the voicemail with what he was seeking with Lorelai. So I found it a little off-putting, and I thought it was inappropriate to be making a comment like that on a landline where, again, this is just Rory could hear that voicemail. If you were calling Lorelai's personal cell phone and she was the only one that was going to listen to that message, it's a bit different. But we still have a minor in this situation, and I think for so many reasons, and this is another point that I'll continue to bring up as we talk about Lorelai and Max's relationship, Rory's well-being and how she was reacting to this unfolding was never really considered, I think, as significantly as it should have been. So that voicemail, I'm going to give it a thumbs down. I don't think it was appropriate, but what do you think?
Yeah, I agree and just echo everything you just said. Is a big thumbs down. That's a no from me, dog. Hey, remember shared landlines?
Shared.
Those were the days.
Is that a
Don't.
payphone? I don't even know what that is.
Oh my God, there are payphones in the show. Oh man, what a throwback. God, I feel old. But yeah, just very inappropriate. And I mean, I guess, speaking of inappropriate, in the next episode, he tracks Lorelai down at the bake sale at Chilton and pulls her aside and says he wants the ice to thaw. And then, he asks her out for coffee. And he says that there's nothing in the Chilton Honor Code that expressly prohibits teachers from dating parents. But how do you feel about that? Like, do you think it was appropriate for him to not only ask her out at Chilton, but to ask her out at all?
Again, this bothered me even more so than the voicemail, which at least in that moment, you're sort of privatizing a conversation between you and Lorelai. But this is a school function that is being held at Chilton Prep. There's no way that this is appropriate to me whatsoever. I'll even say this. I have my brother is actually an educator and he's in the school system. And one of the things that he and I always discussed when he was starting out in that profession was this code of ethics and how it was going to, like, what was proper for him to do, how should be conducting himself as he entered into this field. And a lot of the things that we see Max doing were the things that I would even tell my own brother, don't ever do that. Just don't. You are, again, at a school function. You are there probably to supervise. You are not there to lay groundwork for a relationship or start chatting it up with the Chilton moms or dads or anyone who's available, really. That's not your function there. I don't think it was appropriate to ask her out in that moment at the bake sale. And I really don't think it's appropriate to be asking her out at all. You're her daughter's educator. Again, there's ethics and a moral standard here that he should be abiding by. And I think it's just a cop out for him to say, oh, well, there's nothing in the Chilton handbook that prohibits it. You're just excusing behavior that you know is shady, perhaps not above board to suit your own whims and your own desires at this point. So again, it's a no for me, dog. Big two thumbs down on this one, not even one. Yeah, I frown upon this entire situation and how this is unfolding. But again, give me your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's almost like we're friends or something and we, just get each other. But yeah, he is going right up to the boundaries of propriety with this for sure. Whether it's expressly forbidden or not, it's just not a good idea. It's, I mean, it comes up later when things go badly.
Mm-hmm.
But Charleston expresses to him that he's jeopardizing his future
Mm-hmm.
at Chilton by doing this. And he doesn't seem to care. He is just thinking about his own desires and his own interests in this woman, without, it seems, seemingly without considering the larger ramifications. He's like, well, nothing's like saying I can't do it, but he doesn't really stop to think about all of the repercussions that could come out of it, least of all for his career. Obviously we see that it goes badly in that regard. It does get out at Chilton. And but also for Rory, like you said, he's her educator. He has to see her regularly. And if things go poorly with with dating her mom, that puts her in an extremely awkward position and crosses so many ethical boundaries that it just boggles the mind,
And
Rory,
spoiler, it does go bad.
Yeah.
It does get bad.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler. We warned you.
Yeah. But, Rory is already the new kid at Chilton. She's already having a hard enough time adjusting. She's bombarded with new standards and new people and higher expectations right off the get-go. And in the last episode, like a week ago in Showtime, she's struggling, and he wants her to do well, and he said he's going to do his damnedest to make sure she gets out of Chilton alive. But dating her mom isn't the way to do that. Everyone's just going to look at you with the side eye and think that you're giving her special treatment from this. So her precarious position at the school already is jeopardized even further by her mom agreeing to go out with her teacher. So
And continuing on, we see it play out in this episode, Cinnamon's Wake. Lorelai does not immediately tell Rory that she's going on a date with Max. It's something that comes out sooner rather than later, because Max shows up at Lorelai's door to get her and pick her up for the evening and start it off. That date ends up not happening because, as we all know, Babette's cat Cinnamon, rest in peace.
Rip.
Passed, and there was the cat wake and funeral on the same day that Max and Lorelai were due to have their first date. So we see Max show up to the Gilmore household to pick up Lorelai, and Rory sees Max at the door and questions, "Why is my teacher here? What is he doing?" And Lorelai freezes in that moment and has to come clean and say, "Oh, he's here for me because we're going out on a date." And you can see how immediately uncomfortable Rory gets. And that's not fair to her. Lorelai is a grown woman. Her adult life and whom she chooses to date in that aspect of her lifestyle is her own choice to make. And she has some autonomy there that she doesn't necessarily owe Rory full explanations. But in this case, just seeing how uncomfortable her daughter was, you should have said something and you didn't. And now look at what's happening.
Yeah. I don't think Lorelai needed Rory's permission to date Max. Because you're right. She is a grown woman who can make her own choices. I mean, granted, I don't think this was a good choice, but she's allowed to make her own mistakes, right? And so, yeah, I don't think she needed the permission, but they do have this very special connection. And a lot of that connection is based on communication and trust, and not telling Max risked that trust. So, but, that said, I don't necessarily disagree with her. Okay. I don't think dating Max was a great idea in the first place, but I also think it wasn't necessarily terrible to decide to hold off on telling Rory that she was going out with Max, at least until she figured out if it was going to go somewhere. That to me seems legitimate. Like, why worry her or give her news about something that's just not going to happen? So I can kind of see why she at least was waiting until she had further information to avoid a freak out from Rory. But the universe intervened, and
Yep. And this is another point that kind of touches upon what you just said too. There's also an attachment that can happen on Rory's part to Max that goes beyond all of a sudden seeing this man as an educator, but potentially seeing him as a stepfather figure, filling that role. So I can also see, and you make an excellent point there, that Lorelai was in the right for that reason, if not several others, to withhold that information, because you don't want your kid getting attached to someone that's not going to be a part of your life long if the first few dates don't go well, so why bother?
Yeah. It's true. So
yeah, but then we move on to our next Max sighting in Love and War and Snow, where they actually end up having their first date. And I think there can be probably two different opinions that can be voiced from viewers on how this first date goes down, if it was planned, if it was just kismet, spontaneous, the universe is bringing them together. But do you want to touch on how they end up actually meeting up again and having that first date?
right. So there's a huge snowstorm in Connecticut that evening. It's a Friday night. Lorelai's supposed to be in Hartford for dinner. Rory gets trapped in Hartford and just heads straight to her grandparents right from school. And so because the roads are crappy and Lorelai can't drive out to Hartford, she ends up taking a walk around town because she loves the snow. And while she's out on her walk, she notices Max Medina at the auto shop with a mechanic with his head in Max's. Why am I blanking on what you call the front
engine?
Yeah, like in the engine, in the under the hood. That's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking for. Under the hood. I don't drive. That's probably why I'm blanking on this. But right, and so Max is looking crestfallen, and the mechanic sort of shakes his head like, "Sorry, buddy," and then he spots Lorelai across the road, and they just sort of have one of those like, "Huh," kind of looks. And she goes over to him and has a chat and asks him what he's doing there, and he says that he's on his way back from Stanford, which is where he's giving a night class, and his car broke down off the turnpike, and he had to stop into Stars Hollow to have someone check it out. So that's how we ended up in Stars Hollow that night.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we had this conversation where you suggested that maybe he did that on purpose, and I disagree, but you can go ahead and give your thoughts.
No, I mean, stranger things have happened. It could have just been that, yeah, your car did genuinely break down on the side of the road outside of the Stars Hollow exit, and you had to turn off there because what other choice did you have? But his voice, one of his like most previous voicemails prior was just him saying like, there's a beautiful woman out in Stars Hollow who I one day hope to spend time with. So I don't know, were you just trying to orchestrate that and make it happen by having car troubles outside of Stars Hollow? Or I don't know. I'm not fully buying that there wasn't a part of him there that maybe was just like, let me just turn off here and have to spend the night or just try and figure something out and hope I can run into her.
I mean, I understand the impulse to want or to put those pieces together the way that you did, but I think it's too convenient, because I think maybe at best he had like a check engine light come on, and he's like, I'm just gonna see if I can push this to the Stars Hollow exit. You know, I think that's maybe as far as you can stretch it, because, you know, he did go to the auto body shop. The mechanic did look at it and did seem to, you know, like shake his head no. So I think there was something legitimately wrong with his car. How he ended up in Stars Hollow, again, I think it's coincidence. And, you know, he couldn't have known that Lorelai was out for a walk that night to spot him there. And if he had just shown up at her house and said, hey, I had car trouble and I didn't know where else to go, that would have been super sketchy. But the fact that they sort of spotted each other from across the road after, you know, if you watch the scene closely, which I did, you can actually see that his car really is being inspected, and the mechanic really is saying that the outlook is not great for him to have it fixed tonight and for him to get out of town. So I think that it was written to be serendipity. So, but the date itself is interesting. Something that I noticed was like the first scene we get of them actually having the date is her asking him if he's ever been married. You know, he's like, what do you want to know? And she's like, have you ever been married? And he says, no. And she said, have you ever been close? And he says once, that woman is now in Thailand. She went for work, did well, and never came back. So, what do you think of the fact that like Lorelai just dove headfirst into asking him if he'd ever been married?
It was a bold move on her part, but I think Max handled it exceptionally well. I think every man is going to respond differently to that. Some might just be instantly scared off, like, why is this woman just asking me such a heavy hitting question right off the bat? We're on our first date. Why is this getting that serious? So I will commend Max first and foremost for answering the question and just taking it in stride and just being like, if that's what you want to know, like, I'm an open book. I'll talk to you about my life and those more personal aspects of it. Um, but I can see why Lorelai is asking the question, why waste your time with somebody who is not going to be on board and in line with the goals and hopes that you have for yourself and a romantic partner with in terms of like how you see your life playing out. So it's not always a question that gets asked on the first date. Again, for reasons of it could just scare the other person off. And if you're trying to pursue something with them, that's something that you maybe want to be a little more tactful about. But I understand the overall impulse and desire to have some of those conversations sooner rather than later so that you're not dating someone for endless amounts of, I say endless amounts of time, but months or years when the compatibility isn't there and the relationship isn't going to go anywhere because you don't want the same things. At
Yeah.
the end of the day, Lorelai still did not ask as many questions as she should have, which is one of the reasons why this relationship failed. And we'll get to talking about that too. Some of the things that they should have talked about that they didn't. But she was asking some of the important questions early on, and I can understand why.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the age that Lorelai was when she was having this date, and I took a very similar stance when getting into my last relationship because, I'm at a phase in my life where I've dated and I knew what I wanted and I didn't want to mess around with anyone who was not on the same page about me about the big life stuff because I don't have years to waste on the wrong person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, my boyfriend took it in stride. Well done, sir. Um, but yeah, it's it's good, I think, that she's asking this question and that he was so candid about his answer. And it's nice that they developed this early rapport. You can see it in the next scene with them as well when they're at the movie theater and they're bantering and they're, you know, answering each other's questions and feeling and looking comfortable with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a promising start that didn't quite go far enough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, ask the heavy hitting questions, make sure that there are no red flags, especially when, you know, you're not necessarily out here just to date casually. And when you have a 16-year-old daughter who will be dragged into this if things continue, and especially considering this guy is her teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe she could have let in with something a little easier.
Less, yeah.
I mean, I'm fine with asking it really early. I've done that. But maybe start with, what do you like to do on weekends?
Why did you become a teacher?
Yeah, that's a good one. There
Yeah.
are lots of other questions that get to character and to lifestyle, which are also important things in a relationship. But I'll, check that he's married. That's a good place to
Yeah.
start.
I mean, again, I wouldn't say like go date somebody for months and then just be like, so you're actually single, right? Like, no, let's get that established up front. Let's make sure that, we're good to go here. See what this person's previous relationships have been like. All of that is important. Again, it was blunt of Lorelai to come out swinging in that way, but Max took it well. So maybe
Yeah.
one of the only thumbs up that I'm going to be able to give the man, but I'll I'll give it.
Yeah. I think part of it is just his general bent toward romanticism. He does the
Mm,
whole like, fate, poetry, love, they all go together. It's his passion. And so he, you know, he wants love and romance. And so he's opened himself up to it, and therefore he doesn't need to fear the vulnerability of answering a question like that honestly so early.
Mm-hmm.
So kudos, Max, to like at least having an open heart and being an honest kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. But then we continue on and we see how this date continues to play out, and the two of them end up back at Lorelai's house. Rory is, as previously mentioned, not there because this snowstorm has her stranded at her grandparents' house. So the house is wide open for Max and Lorelai to have some coffee, because what if I just want to come in for some coffee? Which is what Max alludes to when he says, what if, like, I promise that's all I want to come in for. You can tell, I think, that he is wanting and hoping for a bit more, but he's trying to just be as respectful as possible. But what do you think of that moment and that conversation that they have outside of Lorelai's front door when he's essentially asking to come in, and you see that Lorelai is hesitant about it for reasons that we should also talk about too?
I mean, superficially, he seems cool with her setting a boundary, but he also does low-key try to talk her into letting him in for coffee. We're sure we believe you that that's really all you were
That's
expecting.
the end game.
Yeah, but he is smart enough. He is intelligent. He is good with words. He knows how. Yeah, he knows how to use words and romantic ideas to get what he wants with Lorelai. He's able to speak to some primal part of her that has probably never been made to feel like this before, which is why she falls so hard and fast for him. Even though he's like someone who's not right for her and is an ill-advised boyfriend in the first place, given the circumstances with Chilton. So like I don't think he's trying to do it nefariously, but he's being a smidge manipulative here of her emotions by trying to logic her into letting him into her house where she lives with her daughter. You know, I mean, granted, Rory's not there, but she'll be back in the morning. So
yeah, we'll get there. I love how Lorelai kind of just metaphorically, says, like, I've never done this before. And she has that great moment where she's like, I've dated and I've dated, but I've never dated in the house. And it just goes back to, again, there's a kid in this house. Rory is 16 now, but she wasn't always obviously 16. Lorelai has had other men in her life, but none that she's brought back home. And this just goes back to not wanting Rory to get attached to somebody that's not going to be in Lorelai's life long. So I can understand why she's hesitant to let Max inside. And I do agree that it is a little manipulative, especially when he has that line and he says, at some point in your life, you're going to have to decide that some guy is worth opening that front door for. I'm just volunteering.
Yeah. And I'm some guy.
Yeah. I think there is like some sort of genuine aspect to that where he's like, I really do want to get to know you better. So please let me come in for, again, we'll start out with coffee, but that's not where, his mind was at for how the evening was going to go. But I do think that he was just, again, you're trying to worm your way into Lorelai's house right now. And it felt a little wrong and gross and pushy for me. But I would like to think that had she, in the end, said, no, you can't come inside, that Max would have respected that boundary and found somewhere else to stay for the night. Even though he would have been disappointed, I think he would have respected it.
That is true. And that's why I said I don't think it was nefarious. Like, I don't think he was actively trying to manipulate her. I think he was just very excited about the whole situation, and just he had the intellect and the skills to be able to convince her it was a good idea. But I think you're right. He would have ultimately gone to find a hotel or stayed at the inn or something if she did draw that hard line in the sand. But ultimately he does get let inside, and things get very hot for a minute there until they realize Lane is there.
Oh.
So that's a great scene. But how many kids did you say you have?
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, and that's not the focus of our topic of conversation here, but I did feel bad for Lane in that moment, recognizing that she interrupted something that was going really well for Lorelai, and she was just very, I'm having my own moment, but I am really, really sorry about that. So,
yeah, that's true. And we'll talk about it more at a future time. But that conversation that Lorelai has with her to sort of talk her down off her teen angst ledge, um,
mhm,
that was a precious moment and like a great moment of both mothering and being a friend from Lorelai. So uh,
mhm,
love that one. But I think it's a good thing that she was there because she sort of put the brakes on for Max and Lorelai for that evenings. Like they already have taken things pretty quickly, but she made it so that they didn't like go all the way and take it way too far, way too fast. I think it was good that they were able to take a breather from that so
mhm.
they could step back and reflect. And so that the next morning when Rory comes back, she didn't have to see him coming down the stairs in his jammies or something.
Mhm.
So,
She still was very flummoxed, though. I mean, Lorelai has to intercept her at the front door and just be like, hang on, before you come inside. There's a man in the house. He's on the couch. I know that's not a thing that I've done, but I just want to give you a heads up. Also, you know him. It's your teacher."
yeah. I love how she addresses the fact that she broke the rules.
Mhm.
And, what did you think of the rule in the first place? Like, do you think it's a good rule that she just never brings guys home? Is it healthy to compartmentalize to that level?
I think the age that Rory is at needs to come into question here. If she had a 5-year-old daughter at home or even a 10-year-old daughter at home, I think my answer would be very different, where you do have a right to date whomever you please and to bring people back to the house, but a 5 or a 10-year-old is not going to process what is happening in the same way that Rory could at 16. So she's mature enough at this point to understand that her mother, again, does have the autonomy and the right to date whom she wants to. So I can see why that rule would have been in place when Rory was younger, and it does make sense to me. However, I don't think it's a rule that necessarily shouldn't have evolved over time as Rory got older and is able to understand, yeah, mom's going to potentially date people and bring men home. And she'll understand that even more so because she's getting into her own relationships with boys as well. So she understands the desire that's there.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And I do agree that the rules need to adapt to the circumstances as Rory gains more agency and maturity about the situation. But, that being said, she's only 16 at the moment. She still has some time left at home. It will impact her. So they do need to negotiate boundaries and expectations in order to
Mm-hmm.
maintain some sense of like security and stability for her. Again, coming back to, especially because this guy is her teacher.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take too much longer after that particular moment and that particular scene for Rory's classmates to start finding out that, yeah, your mom's dating Max Medina. And we see an immediate fallout from that stemming from Paris and other students. But that's kind of what was always worrisome in my mind for Rory, where what's the student backlash going to be like when and if this becomes public knowledge? How is Charleston going to handle it? How are your classmates going to handle it? What are other Chilton parents going to say? And it comes into question pretty soon after this because they're spotted kissing together and that information just gets leaked out.
Yeah. I mean, backing up a little bit, um, a lot of this kind of stems from the fact that Rory is clearly starting to get used to the idea of Max being around and her mom dating Max. And she's like, if we have to have a guy around, he seems like a good one. And she
Mm-hmm.
starts calling him by his first name. And that freaks Lorelai out. And I don't know if it genuinely is because she's uncomfortable with seeing Rory start to get attached to a guy, or whether it's because she's deflecting and refusing to deal with her own doubts about Max being the right guy for her. Because she has that conversation with Suki in the kitchen where she's like, he's a great guy for someone. And then Suki
Mm-hmm.
accuses her of doing the cha 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 right at the 2 month mark, just cha cha chaing right out of that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And, Suki touches on a nerve and it really gets under Lorelai's skin, and she tries to break up with Max at school. So like she's trying to get out of this relationship, but their whole like breakup conversation just leads to them devolving into their like giving into their lustful impulses, which are
Mhm.
the basis for most of their relationship at this point. You know, she seems to be having some issues committing to him, which is a red flag. Listen to yourself, girl. You
Mhm.
know, your intuition probably is telling you something. You're probably right to try to get out of this relationship. And, you know, so they end up having it out in the classroom, and she just keeps making excuses and deflecting and projecting onto Rory. And it ends up with him, they're having this sort of like moment where she's being avoidant and he's being insecure, and
Mhm.
they're just like setting each other off.
Yeah.
And they don't recognize what they're doing with each other. She's just like, I don't know how to express myself to you. I don't know how to communicate my feelings. Breakups are hard, you know?
Mhm.
We're never taught how to break up with someone effectively. It's just something we have to learn the hard way over many unfortunate attempts a lot of the time. And
Mhm.
so, you know, she's never really, well, at least we've never we've never learned how she breaks up with guys. So clearly this is probably just her pattern as well. Her ghosting and avoiding. And Max picks up on it, calls her out on her BS, and he gets sort of insecure at the thought of her trying to pull away and trying to leave. And he's like, you know, I want, what is it, 12 clown or no, 100 clowns in a Volkswagen. That's the kind of non-space I'm talking
Yeah.
about. You know, he wants that intimacy and that closeness, and she's not ready to give it to him. And they clash over it, ending up with them kissing and Paris spotting them.
Mhm.
So just top notch, Lorelai. Well done. Best
Yeah.
breakup ever.
Yeah, you did what you set out to do, and now you just made things even worse for your daughter. Brava. I tip my hat to you. I
Yeah.
applaud. Um, but touching on something that you just said too, I think one of the biggest red flags in Max and Lorelai's relationship was just that, especially for Max, again, going back to potentially that he doesn't have a lot of women in his age bracket that he's interacting with, that a lot of his time is spent at school. I think there was also just a lot of loneliness that he was trying to combat. And Lorelai comes into your life and she's filling a void that you had that perhaps you didn't even realize was there, or you didn't realize how significant of a void it was. And now that she starts pulling away, I think you're correct that you do see that sort of insecure attachment coming into play where he's just so afraid of losing her that he starts clinging harder, because if Lorelai goes away, he just goes back to that loneliness and that void that he had before, and he doesn't want that. And it doesn't mean that that's a right reason for him to stay with her. In fact, it's probably a reason why you again should really be reevaluating what it is that you like about each other and why you're in this relationship. It can't just be about that this person makes me feel not lonely. That's not fair to her. That's not fair to yourself. It's going to really just fry your relationship down the line. It's again just a horrible building block for it.
Yeah. And you know, this is the end of their first iteration of their relationship. It marks a lull in the progression for them, and you know, they don't really pick it back up until like it's the breakup part 2 when,
Mhm.
you know, Rory is out at that party at Madeline's house, and you know, Lorelai is trying to coach Rory through this breakup, and she realizes in doing so that she hasn't fully dealt with her feelings for Max. And you know, she tells him that she didn't wallow, that she never got over him.
Mhm.
She didn't want to wallow because she thought it could be repaired or wanted it to be repaired. And
Mhm.
so they seemingly just get back together without resolving what broke them up in the first place. You know, like do you have any
Mhm.
thoughts about them getting back together like that?
Again, I just think that they're trying to just repair this hole and this void that's in their life, that is just when you're not being emotionally fulfilled and you find someone that could potentially do that for you, it's very appealing, but that doesn't translate to full compatibility across the board. And I don't think that they were ever mature enough, the both of them. I'm not singling out Max, I'm not singling out Lorelai. I don't think either one of them really were mature enough to realize that that's what was going on here. They were kind of just going all in on each other to try and avoid the reality of not being a part of each other's lives. So again, it's disastrous to me, and it's just another red flag that they're both ignoring.
Yeah, and we see in a few more episodes how this is impacting Rory when she finds out about it, because Lorelai hides that from her too, and it causes them strife. Like Rory is already upset about the whole Dean situation, and everyone's tiptoeing around her feelings, and suddenly she finds out that her mom's been hiding this big piece of news from her. And do you think Lorelai should have told her right away?
I think it's Lorelai's prerogative not to, but that being said, I think she should have. You've withheld so much about this relationship from Rory already, and it's never played out well for you or for her. So I think there should have been a little more transparency here. And every time that Lorelai missteps in this regard, it just what are you teaching your daughter about how to have a healthy relationship? You're not really setting any good examples for her. I think if anything, you're just teaching her to be afraid of commitment, because every time you've gotten close to a man, you always run away from it. It's something that even, again, Suki sees. So if you can't commit to a relationship and you just become so afraid and go running for the hills, she's just teaching Rory a lot of just really disastrous behaviors within a relationship and not imparting any knowledge on how to maintain a healthy relationship with a significant other.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just think to that scene in P.S. I Love, where they're in Rory's bedroom that Emily set up in the last episode, and having that conversation about love, and how Lorelai kind of admits to wrapped up in my own stuff that I never really thought about what I was teaching you about love. And I would hate to think that I raised a kid who couldn't say I love you, but that's exactly what she's done. She, never thought about how her behavior was modeling, like you said, that lack of commitment. And I think it directly goes to what happened between Rory and Dean in the car in episode 16. So yeah, I think she's setting some poor examples for Rory. Not just on this, but on like a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
this is just one of many.
We even see Max just trying to verbalize his love for Lorelai, and she's just so unresponsive to it. It's a direct parallel to what you just said that Rory did with Dean. You're not setting a good example for your kid, and how can you expect Rory to ever have and hope for her to have a healthy relationship when you're setting this standard for her that's just completely unhealthy in every regard?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I guess that kind of brings us to the next part, which is, the season finale of season 1, where everything comes to a head in their relationship. Things finally seem to be getting somewhere with them when Luke's breakup with Rachel kind of starts to shake things up a little bit, and he shows up and essentially has a pissing match with Max. Which, gosh. God, that scene. Oh, I love it.
Eye rolling so hard.
It's so much fun to watch, but it's so like toxic in reality. But it's just, oof. I really want to talk about the proposal itself in more depth at a future time. Like we will be talking about all the proposals on the show, sort of when we talk about those episodes from the end of the season in, I think it's January. We'll be talking about that. But obviously this is a really important, critical moment for Lorelai and Max's arc. So I think it should be addressed here as well. But, so they have this big fight, and Max decides that the proper way to end the fight and to break the bad pattern that they've been in is to get married. Thoughts?
hello Band-Aid, like, and the most egregious of Band-Aids that you can try and slap on a relationship. I think the only thing worse is the go-to of just two people who are together, married or not, who are just like, let's have a baby because that will fix this. Like,
Christopher.
Yeah. We'll get there. We'll get
Yeah.
there. Everything will always come up. But yeah, it's just like a baby will not fix your relationship. You marrying Lorelai is not going to fix this either. You still have not taken the time to adequately know each other in the way that you should. You've asked one or two big questions amongst probably hundreds that should be addressed and answered. And we even have a great scene after the proposal where Lorelai has not even said yes or no yet, but she goes and she tries to like tell Luke and break the news to him. And Luke gets a bit invasive here when I don't think it was necessarily any of his business to question Lorelai, but he still brings up really good points to Lorelai about, have you thought about where you're going to live? How is Rory's education going to change if it does? Is she going to have to switch schools? You know, if one of you dies, you want to know where the coupon drawer is. Like, and that's, just a comedic, not so serious joke on his part. But the point that he's trying to make here to Lorelai is just that before you enter into a marriage with somebody, you need to have all, and I put emphasis on all of these really big questions answered for yourself and for the both of you. And Lorelai hasn't done it. And she dismisses Luke in that moment because she's, again, saying this is none of your business. And it really is not. But you see that it stays with her. And she starts really thinking about what he has said and questioning it herself.
I'm just thinking of the hypocrisy of the moment where she kind of is like, how is this your place to tell me these things? When in a few seasons from now, with the whole Nicole thing, and Luke moves to Litchfield, and she's like, how could you not tell me that you moved to Litchfield?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, it's about me and it's about her and it's not about you. Not everything is about you. And, she brings up the fact that like they're friends and friends talk about these things. And so I think in a way, it was actually a good thing that Luke brought this stuff up because apparently Lorelai's not thinking about it. So someone had to. So, and I think as her friend, I know they have sort of like a weird, complicated relationship sometimes, but as her friend, he had every right to be like, whoa, hold your horses. What are you doing here? I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but maybe think about these things first. And so I'm glad someone stepped up because Suki and Rory were no help there.
No, it's a very tricky and complicated scene because you can tell that Luke's motivation for what he is saying to Lorelai stems from slight jealousy from about you wanting to be the one for Lorelai and the man that she ends up with. And, there's a lot of just disappointment. Like he poker faces it very well, where that he has to be hurting that she's about to marry someone else when he definitely has these feelings for her. So a part of it is coming from that. But I do think you're right that the other side of this card is that he does care for her as a friend, and he is trying to look out for her and say, hang on, there's a lot about this that isn't right for you. And I'm trying to make you notice that before you dive headfirst into a marriage that is probably not going to end well for you for all of these aforementioned reasons. Max has never met Richard and Emily up and like at this point. He does very briefly in a future episode where Lorelai goes to the house to confront Emily, but they have never even met each other's parents. And it's not necessarily something that should or has to happen, especially if you have a toxic or negative relationship with your parents. You don't want to bring a potential spouse into that equation. But Max always seemed to have a good relationship with his parents. They cut him a nice $35 check. So
the first of 4 installments.
Yeah. Like that just was something that was always like my eyebrow is going to get raised there too. Why haven't you met each other's parents yet? But you're getting married. I don't know. It's just, there's a lot there too it's not feeling okay.
Yeah, I need like a red flag that I can wave around for this but like you can only buy them in packs of like 50 on Amazon. Trust me, I've looked.
Yeah.
I think I might just
well,
one. We've had this conversation.
to be fair, we would have used all 50 in this episode.
I don't have that many hands, but yeah, if we were giving a flag for each issue instead of just waving the one flag around all the time, yeah, we would have used them all. Yeah, you make an excellent point. I was like, oh yeah, there's just so much that they haven't addressed, and obviously that freaks Lorelai out, but it just sort of underlines the issue that this proposal is hollow. They love the idea of each other more than they love each other. And they're like, we're in our 30s. We should be settling down. You seem like a nice person. How about you? Which is so not the way to go about it. And
no.
Luke, of all people, constant curmudgeonly bachelor that he is the one who points out to Lorelai that she needs to have some serious conversations with this guy, and she needs to really like reflect on, whether they're actually a good match for each other. It's kind of shocking that he's the one that pushes her to do this. But then I guess, that crosses us over into season 2 where, they leave us on a cliffhanger. We have no idea if she said yes to him. I'm so glad I watched this later and didn't have to wait an entire summer for that.
Yeah.
But, she calls him from her Friday night dinner and asks him a bunch of questions about, where are we going to live and how's this going to go? And once again, nothing is actually addressed. She just poses a bunch of questions and he's like, are you saying yes?
Yeah.
And they just sort of, again, managed to sideswipe everything.
Yeah, you can't tell, but like, again, my eyes are rolling back into my head so hard. She poses you questions, you don't answer. You just, are you saying yes? Are we going to get married? No, dude, she's asking you questions. Answer them. These are all of the things that she's trying to bring up because she's having her own concerns about this. And he's pressuring her without even realizing it, because at the end of that phone call, she obviously does say yes, goes back into the living room, kind of without verbalizing it, lets Rory know that, like, yeah, it's happening, it's on. And I'm just, every time I watch that scene, I'm sitting there just like, oh my gosh, no, like, you guys don't know what you are doing. Like, yeah, that's exactly it. I'm just face palming so hard, like, oh, this doesn't end well, but here we go. Keep riding the express train into just disaster.
Yeah, I think the fact that we know what's coming just makes it worse to rewatch. But yeah, the fact that she didn't say yes immediately and wholeheartedly is a big problem for me. The fact that they left it as a cliffhanger and she needed time to think about it, like, if she was truly in love with him, she would be radiating. She would be sure of herself, and she would know that, like, this is the man for her. This is who she wants to build a life with. And the fact that she has to, think about it is a really, really bad sign that this is not going to end well for anyone.
Waving the imaginary red flag.
Yeah, just
keep on waving it.
Yeah.
And how does, like, at that point too, how does, like, Max is still just like, oh no, it's fine, like, you can think about it, like, for him to, how do you you just asked this woman to marry you. She
on
is
the
not
phone.
able, on the phone, she's not able to give you a clear-cut answer, but you still stick with it, hoping that it can work out. Like, I
Run
don't
away,
know. Like,
Max.
I don't want to generalize, but I feel like any person in that situation, if there's ever a time that you need to so drastically reevaluate your relationship, it's when you propose to somebody and they're just like, I don't know. Yeah, like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about legally tying yourself to someone purportedly forever. You may want to, be sure that that's the route you want to take. And if you're not sure, then that should be a major sign to you that something here is not right. So all is not well in Whoville.
No.
So, yeah. I kind of wish that they had ended season 1 on the cliffhanger, but then had season 2 open up with her being like, oh, hell no, that was incredibly toxic. And like anyone who would do this to me is not the right person. You know, the fact that I was not wholeheartedly in this and needed to think about it for even a second means it's a no. You know, if it's not a yes, it's a no in this case with something like a wedding proposal. And it would have been nice to see her recognize what was wrong with that, because that would have at least shown some growth on her part. But you know, and then because they spend the first 4 and a bit episodes, like there's a little bit of overlap into Nick and Norrison and Nancy with Max, but like the first 4 episodes essentially sort of wrapping up this relationship that never really should have happened in the first place. And it feels like season 2 was sort of like a slow start because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they wanted to like pull the rug out from under us and be like, think we were going to have this wedding early in the season and see them actually tie the knot. But, you know, I when I was watching this with my boyfriend, I told him that season 2, episode 5 is kind of where the show feels like it starts, which is right where they end the Max era and bring in Jess, which injects a whole new life into the show. So I think, I don't want to say they wasted time on it, but maybe it's just because I know how it ends up for them and how unfulfilling it feels, how they wrapped up the storyline, that I wish that they had maybe handled it a little bit differently and not made it seem like this toxic dynamic was romantic and like like you can talk yourself into wanting to say yes to a wedding proposal. I wish that Lorelai had recognized it from the off. Kind of skipped over Hammers and Veils a little bit. But I think there's some interesting stuff in there that I want to touch on. Like, okay,
go ahead.
We start out with her coming down the stairs with newspaper on her head and asking Rory's opinion on veil lengths. And Rory's like, why don't we just go to a bridal shop? And she's like, no, like, it's too much taffeta. It gives me cotillion flashbacks. You know, I feel weird in the bridal shop. She doesn't want to go shopping for a wedding dress or a veil. And that to me is yet another red flag because, you know, if you're really, I mean, granted, not everybody's really into the whole like big white dress thing, but you know, most people have at least some level of excitement for the actual planning and doing those things that are supposed to be the fun, big events that are part of that process. Wedding dress shopping being one of them. And it reminds me of Sex and the City when Aiden asks Carrie to marry him. And she and Miranda go into this bridal shop and try on just, you know, 2 of the ugliest dresses known to man. Like, you know, they just did this for giggles, basically. And Carrie has an actual anxiety attack in the changing room. They have to rip the dress off her, and she has hives all down her back because she is having such a visceral reaction to the idea of marrying Aiden, and seeing her in a wedding dress has like triggered something in her to have this reaction. And it makes me think of that because I think Lorelai is kind of coming from a very similar place where this desire not to go to a traditional wedding shop might have some like deeper seated origins that she's not picking up on, where she was more excited with the Luke thing when they went wedding dress shopping, and they just stopped in, or they were going for the invitations and they ended up going into that shop, and she sees a dress on a mannequin and is like, that's it, that's the dress, right? And only upon further reflection is she like, something about this is not quite right. And she doesn't even get the opportunity to do that here. She doesn't even want to go. We don't know what she was planning to wear to her wedding, but yeah, the fact that she doesn't want to go wedding dress shopping just baffles me.
And yeah, especially keep going. I was just about to say too, especially because at first she's seemingly so excited about what ring Max is going to get for her. And there's that great scene when she and Rory are at the kitchen table and Rory takes the phone call, but she's there and she's just like, yeah, this kind of diamond. And, Lorelai is either shooting it down or just being indifferent to it. And then the ring comes up from like, oh, it's 20s, it's from the 1920s. And she starts like panning. And it's just like, how can you get that excited about a ring? But then when that very same man, this is not even a different relationship, it's with the same guy, then proposes to you, all of a sudden it's like night and day. And whereas you were so excited about the ring, all of a sudden now you're just dreading wedding dress shopping. Again, red flag. I think it was just you're excited about the ring and you're idealizing what that represents, but you don't love the man that is behind the scenes giving, not even behind the scenes, you don't love the man that's presenting you with the ring. You're just more excited about the ring itself.
Yeah, two things on that. One, put Cujo on the phone. Oh, that's just a feral dog that hangs out here sometimes. Oh, that's such a good line. And two, the fact that the ring doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm. It's not telling at all. It doesn't mean anything.
Nope. It's not a metaphor for anything.
Nope.
It's not a symbol. But yeah, and then so the end of that episode has their wedding shower.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things that, again, sort of tips me off a little bit about her level of commitment, because you see her dominance in this moment. You see, like, she even says, in this town, I'm a queen and you are simply my jester. And, this is kind of the first time that Max is really introduced to Stars Hollow and made a part of their festivities for something. And it is clear that Lorelai kind of, rules that town a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that dynamic plays out in other areas of their relationship where it's like, it's Lorelai's way or the highway. We see more of it coming in the next episode, and we'll get to that in a minute too. But, the fact that she also tells him that when he comes back from Toronto, she'll be just as infatuated with him as she is now. I'm like, oh, the fact that you use the word infatuated instead of in love.
Yeah.
I think that says everything we need to know about how she feels. This is very much like a 16-year-old type of relationship where, you're just obsessed with someone and there's no meat to the relationship. There's no realness or profoundness or I don't even know what other words to try to use to describe
maturity,
this.
but
there's no maturity to it.
It's understandable but not okay, because again, that's really all that Lorelai has ever known. When you're having relationships as a teenager and then you end up getting pregnant at 16 and your life becomes about your child, and even though she's had men in her life after the fact, it just never seemed like she's had like what is a mature or healthy relationship. So I can get and understand why she's not able to have that now, and why she is still in the learning phase with relationships, almost in the same way that Rory is. You can almost say like they're just running parallel to each other with learning how to have a healthy relationship with a guy or just with any person. But you're 32 now, so I would have thought that you would have learned something, if not everything. And that's why Lorelai's immaturity that comes across so often is just really perplexing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 32 and I don't know everything. I don't expect anyone to know everything.
No, but again, should have learned something.
Yeah, I don't think she dated enough throughout her 20s to really know, and I get it. She had a young child. She didn't really have the opportunity that a lot of us did to sow our wild oats. But that just goes to the point that, like, maybe like pick up a book on marriage or, do some research, learn something, ask some questions. Like, don't just jump into something with someone because you think it's where you should be at in your life.
Yeah. So again, just so many red flags.
Yeah. Ooh, next red flag.
Red light on the wedding night, which is
in the cold open, we have a red flag where they're tasting the wedding cakes, and Rory says that she has some quotes for the programs.
Oh man, I know where you're going.
Yeah, and so she reads out Lord Byron and Sinclair Lewis, and And then we have buried the putrid corpse of liberty is the winner. When you poo-poo Byronic romantic poetry in favor of a quote from a just dictator. What?
Yeah. Perché?
Oh my god. Yeah, just yeah.
That's the one. Just go with
slap it on there. Just print it up. Oh, and then we have the casual early 2000s homophobia.
Mm-hmm.
the gay boy band reference.
Yeah.
Just yeah. We've been completely in sync.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you really, Lorelai? I don't think you are.
No, and you make a very good point about the homophobia. That was not a good moment for this show at all. But just speaking on what you just said, are you guys in sync? And again, the answer to me is a very clear-cut no. I think now that Max has gotten a yes from you in terms of an answer, like that's you've agreed to marry me, she's said yes, I will do anything that I can to make sure that that yes stays in place and that I can essentially lock it down with this woman. And I think that Max very much becomes a yes man. And that is so incredibly toxic in its own right, where you're just going to agree with and go along with everything that Lorelai says, because again, you're so afraid of losing her and defaulting back to the loneliness and the life free of her that you had before, that you're just again trying so hard to keep this person in your life that you'll just agree and go with anything, even if it means bypassing and ignoring your own needs and desires. It's just again, red flag, another recipe for failure within this relationship. It's why you should not be getting married. How many times do we have to keep bringing this up to them? Like, I would want to like shake Max and Lorelai and just be like, stop it, you guys, just stop it.
You should know better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can we talk about the fact that like Dean has to school Max on how to exist in Gilmore Land?
Mm-hmm. A 16-year-old boy is telling you what to do. And if he knows the Gilmore women better than you do, this is a boy that is, he cares about Rory, but they're still in that casual dating phase of their relationship. And he's educating you on what you need to know to fit into their lives. But this is like you're about to marry this woman and you don't know this and you're having to learn it from a 16-year-old. Like again, I sometimes I just want to like just face palm to death because I can't take it. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah. In the words of Emily D. Baker, I have questions.
So many questions.
Oh, and then, the fact that they go up, well, first Max tries to sort of be like, hey guys, like it's the end of the night, wrap it up, like come inside. And then he confronts Lorelai about it and she's like, they're 16, they can kiss a little, it's fine. And then he goes into this whole thing about like, what's my role here? And again, fact that they haven't talked about this, bit of a problem. But what do you think about that whole conversation in her room where they're sort of rehashing again that they haven't had these conversations?
I think Max is right to pose the question about what is my role here? If we are going to be married, I am going to be assuming the role of Rory's stepfather. What responsibilities does that entail? Like, should I be parenting her? Should I be disciplining her? Should I be reprimanding her for behavior that I don't deem to be appropriate? And it's a good and I think fair question for Max to be asking, because he is going to, in my opinion, have some rights as Rory's stepfather if that marriage and that if it had continued on and if that marriage had taken place and if he had stepped into that role. So I think it's a good question for him to ask. Again, it's a question that should have been broached before you proposed, just in the general sense of what are your feelings on how to raise a child and what do you think is appropriate and not. But Lorelai's response is just so incredibly dismissive to Max, and I hate it, where she's just like, Rory's grown. I've done what I need to do with her. And to an extent, yes, okay, she is 16, so she does have a good enough head on her shoulders. She is raised somewhat to be able to make decisions about that. And it just goes back to what you said, like, she can kiss a boy. She's 16 years old. Like, that's totally normal behavior. But for Lorelai to be so dismissive of Max and to just say, like, no, you don't need to do anything there. And on top of that, we don't even need to be having this conversation. You know, let's just move on. Like, none of that is right to me. I think Lorelai needed to communicate better her feelings and not be so dismissive of Max and have him just be sitting there like, well, then what am I even doing here?
Yeah. Once again, Lorelai's just compartmentalizing with the best of them because she sees it as like her and Rory, like that's the family unit. And then she sees like Max over here, and it's not about them merging, but rather what he is to her. And so, you know, she's like, you're my fella, you're my guy. And, you know, that just sort of strips him of any like agency within their family unit. And, you know, to a certain extent, she's kind of right? Like, Rory is 16. She is going to be leaving for college soon. She doesn't need a ton of direction. Like you said, she's got a great head on her shoulders for now.
For now.
Yeah, like, he doesn't have to do a whole lot of hands-on parenting or discipline. But, you know, setting those boundaries and expectations and all that is still important because, at least for the time being, they're all going to have to cohabit. And it's clear that there's some sort of disconnect there where Lorelai sees him as an outsider, as an accessory for her, but not really as someone that she's starting a family with. Because to her, it like everything is about her and Rory, and it always has been. So she hasn't been able to make that shift from just the two of us to the family thing. And you can really see this when she sneaks down to Rory's room in the middle of the night, and she's like, "It's weird. There's a guy in my room."
Yeah, and Rory has to just be like, "You're like essentially like you're 32. Like,
yeah, you're like wigging.
Go back to your room. Like, just handle this like an adult. Like, what is wrong with you?"
She literally says that. She's like, "Lorelai, go to your room.
Go to your room." I always took this as like, for whatever reason, and there are probably several that we're not going to touch upon. Lorelai is very uncomfortable with having a boy in her room. But you're 32, so I'm just a little perplexed there. But again, we're not going to get into the reasons why. But it takes Rory to just kind of talk her off this ledge and just be like, it's okay. Like, this is normal. Like, you should have a boy in your room. Like, go back upstairs. Like, you know, why are you down here? Why are you not with him? But I also always took it as Lorelai being so uncomfortable and kind of wanting an out to the situation of having a boy in her room, but also kind of just having Max in her life at that point, where it's her MO to go running for the hills at a certain point within her relationships. So I think this is also her just seeking an out and trying to almost pin it on Rory, where if Rory says, where if Rory can say, like, I'm uncomfortable and I don't want this person in the house, in our lives, because XYZ, Lorelai would have taken it and run with it and used that as her excuse to break it off with Max because, oh, my daughter's uncomfortable, when the real reason is that you're not willing and capable to address what is making you uncomfortable within this relationship and questioning why you're having such difficulty with commitment.
Yeah. And or that you're unwilling or unable to adapt to changes in your life at all. And I think we see that in a lot of her relationships. And that's one of the reasons that Luke ends up kind of being the guy for her, is because like he's willing to adapt to her. She doesn't have to change for him. You he's just willing to mold himself around her, where these other guys don't. They have their own lifestyles and ways about them. And we see it in this episode when Rory and Lorelai go to Luke's and are having breakfast. And they say that Max is out looking for the papers, and he comes back and he can't find the Wall Street Journal. And I'm like, does that mean that there's something missing from Max too? Is it sort of like a metaphor for Stars Hollow not having everything that he needs in his life?
I think it is. And I've never thought about that, but that is an excellent metaphor and just a really cool line for you to draw from one point to another. Kudos on the writing there, but yeah, I just think that's very telling, where it is an indication that Stars Hollow doesn't have everything that Max wants, and Max doesn't necessarily have everything that Lorelai wants or needs. And I think that just goes back to as well where all of Stars Hollow, upon her announcing this proposal and this engagement to Max, even the town is kind of just like, really? But have you told Luke? Because Luke is kind of representative of Stars Hollow. So there are just so many signs from Lorelai, from Max, from Rory, from everyone in Stars Hollow, knowing just that, like, this isn't right.
Yeah. And then obviously we have the ultimate demise of their relationship after Lorelai's bachelorette party goes awry, and she ends up calling Christopher instead of Max while everybody else is talking to their beloved. And, we see them have that sort of spat in the inn where he needs to drop off his printer at the house, but he still does not have a key to her house. And, he calls her out and says, you need to think about someone other than yourself for 10 minutes a day. And he's so, so right about that.
Yes, he is.
But that's the last time we see him for a bit. Like, we see him a little bit in episode 5, but that's only sort of like the awkwardness with Rory. But like, this is the last interaction we see between Lorelai and Max. And we find out that their engagement is off when Lorelai wakes up Rory and is like, or comes in to talk to Rory and says, pack, like, we're leaving. She just ends it. I'm assuming she did it over the phone, because so much of the rest of their relationship happened over the phone. All the voicemails, all of the talking before the dates, the proposal itself happened on the phone. Like, it's such a cool way for them to use like this particular strategy, if you will, this visual representation to show the distance and the separation between them. I thought that was a really neat way to show it on TV. And so I'm willing to bet that she called him. I wouldn't be surprised if she left him a voicemail. It's like, sorry, this is over.
Thank you, next.
Yeah, and so she just runs away with Rory so that she doesn't have to face things right away. Again, with the avoidant attachment style, she just can't handle her own feelings, and she will not address them with Rory either.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been through breakups. I think, it's a part of life at some point. Almost all of us are going to go through them. They're never an easy thing to have to combat or to get through. But Lorelai's reaction here was just, I'm really conflicted by it, because I understand that it's hard and it's difficult and that there are a lot of emotions there that you're not going to want to face immediately, because it's just so brutal to have that hit you all at once. But for her to just run from it in the way that she does, where I can't face Luke, I can't face anybody in this town, I can't face any of the questions that I know that are going to be asked of me. I understand all of that, but for her to just flee and run away from it in such a knee-jerk way that she did, and then to even just be so dismissive of Rory asking, like, what happened, and for her to just be like, I need you to just essentially not, and we're just going to go on this road trip. She's not handling it well, and not handling it in a way that I would expect someone of her age to do so. Again, granted, there's never going to be a right or appropriate response to this. Everyone's going to handle that grief in their own way. But I think it's also telling that she just needed to immediately flee from all of it so much. It just, I think, again, speaks to her immaturity and her incapability to deal with emotions.
Yeah, agreed. She doesn't know how to process. But, Rory still has to deal with Max at school. And then, in Nick and Nora, Sid and Nancy, Paris assigns her the interview with Max, who was the most popular teacher from the previous year. And so at least Rory gets some closure with Max and gets to have that conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's good for her because she is so young and this was a big change in her life too. Like she says to her mom in that awful B&B room, this is our lives you just threw away.
Mm-hmm.
And so at least she gets some closure, but we as an audience never quite get closure for what happened between Max and Lorelai, despite the fact that he does come back at the end of season 3 in 2
Mm-hmm.
episodes and they share a kiss and another confrontation where she basically chases him around a classroom and he's like, I can't do this right now because you're like some mythological creature that I can't resist. And, she turns him into this, puddle of insecurity upon seeing him again. So like, I don't like that. I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was not the right choice for them to bring him back for 2 episodes just to like do nothing with him. There was no answer, like there were no answers to what happened between them. There was no closure between them, and he even addresses it saying like not everything is about closure. I wonder if they did it because people were like, hey, will we ever get closure for Max and Lorelai? And they just brought him back to spite everyone and just like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't care if you get closure, this is what you're getting, now take it and shut up.
Yeah, it's possible. And I will say this too. I wish in that scene where Lorelai's chasing Max around the classroom, I really wanted Max to just put her in her place
Mm-hmm.
and just be like, you destroyed me. I thought you loved me. I thought you genuinely cared about me, had affection for me. You said yes to a marriage proposal and conjoining our lives in that way. And then you just yank it from me in the most egregious and sudden of ways. And I'm just instantly removed from your life. You're removed from mine. How dare you come back up into this classroom and try and repair anything? Get out of my face. Like, she, and maybe that's a little bit too harsh, I don't know, but my point being is just that I would have loved that scene to just be Max being like, no, what are you doing? You hurt me, please go away.
Yeah, I don't think the Gilmore Girls face enough accountability for the way that they treat the men in their lives, and this is
Mm-hmm.
just one of the first instances of it where you're right, he should have called her out on it and put her in her place. But once again, she gets off easy and, nonetheless that she's seeing another man when this happens and then he
Mm-hmm.
just fades into obscurity. So, yeah, I really wish he had done that, but it just, again, reinforces the fact that they are sort of like they've got this weird hold over people. They are irresistible. Everyone loves them. Maybe she is a mythological fantasy creature. I mean, I think we want to do a full episode on this someday in terms of assigning characters to their Dungeons and Dragons class.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Lorelai is probably a Draconic Bloodline sorcerer with that high
Mm-hmm.
charisma and that thick skin.
Yep.
So maybe
And
she is some sort of mythical beast.
maybe we will do that episode one day. Don't know when it's going to happen, but there will be that crossover down the line. So,
yeah, we're nerds like that.
yeah,
We're
a
going to
little
play
bit.
D&D right after this too. So
Yeah.
Friday night's all right for fighting.
Yeah. Even better than Saturday, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saturdays.
Yeah. Do you have
Yeah.
any final thoughts on Max before we wrap up this episode and this character study?
I guess I would just say that he is a great guy. I think Scott Cohen did a lovely job portraying, for the most part, a man who is vulnerable and in touch with his emotions and unafraid of romance and intimacy and love. And I think, especially at that time, maybe we weren't getting enough portrayals like that. I can't fully remember because I was young. Maybe there's some stuff I'm not remembering, but just it's a nice counter to the sort of like toxic masculinity that was very prevalent at the time. So I appreciate that they had, this sort of like gentle, kind-hearted, intelligent, sweet man. And I think, his only sin really is that he was blinded by his obsession with her and didn't recognize that they were very wrong for each other and that they were just like fundamentally incompatible because they didn't communicate well and they didn't have a functional, healthy reaction to each other. Like I said earlier, she's avoidant, he's insecure. And those two types are like really likely to clash when it comes to relationships because one person will want to run and that will set off the other person to go into, panic mode. And that's what happened. And I wish he'd had the wisdom to see that. And I also wish he might have had a little bit more wisdom when it comes to just whether it was a good idea for them to have a relationship in the first place, just given his job and the impact that would almost certainly eventually have on Rory, whether it was as dramatic as it ended up being or not. We've touched on it a few times. Rory's feelings and her well-being were not considered enough within this relationship. Not. They were so into each other that they just like completely glossed over the fact that this made things very complicated for her and that nobody knew how to handle it properly. So like Lorelai says, I think he's a great guy for someone. I hope he ended up happy and that he found someone who deserved him and who had a better relationship with him because he's a nice guy and he deserves the love that he's willing to give. So, but he was not the one for Lorelai. He's like not even top 3 for Lorelai in my books.
No. We'll get to that conversation too one of these days when we break down boyfriends and relationships. But I'll just, end with saying that I think I have to echo everything you just said. I think it's spot on. It's everything that I would have said. They were never the right people for one another. That was not your person. You tried to make it work so hard. And I think, again, it just stemmed from a place of like loneliness and not wanting to accept that if you were forced to confront your lack of compatibility, that you would default back to the loneliness you had before. But their building blocks for what they were trying to establish a relationship on were never healthy, were never right. And all I can say is that I just hope, echoing what you said, that Max is able to find someone in his life down the line that was just more compatible with him, that was better suited to him, and that he was able to find happiness in that way because he was a great character and a really lovely man, even if he was never right for Lorelai. So, yeah, heartbreaking, but they can't all work out.
It's true. He was just sort of that like red herring for Lorelai, and he was there to teach her some lessons about what she really needed from a man and from life. So he was sort of a necessary part of her story in some ways, and in other ways it's like, oh, really? Like we all knew this wasn't right. We knew it wasn't going to happen. So why did you put us through this?
Because it's good television.
Yes, it was dramatic and it was fun. And it was a paycheck for Scott Cohen.
Yep. A well-deserved one.
Yes.
I don't think that he was ever written, or I don't think he was even ever intended to like be on the show as long as he was, but he just found such success with his character, and he's not the only one on the show, but that he was just, he embodied the character that he was playing so well that he was just offered more episodes. So I am glad that we were able to see him more than what he was potentially originally contracted for. And I'll never not love what he did with the character. So 2 thumbs up for Scott Cohen, 2 thumbs down for Max Medina.
Well, for Max and Lorelai. Max Medina as a person is just fine, for the most part.
All amended that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's gonna wrap us up here for our discussion on Max. So
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about him in other capacities in the future. We have like 3 years of content planned, so stay tuned. You will probably hear more about Max from us if you love him. So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
he'll definitely come up again. We're going to do more episodes on relationships, on marriage, proposals, all of that fun stuff. So we will get there. But that being said, what have we got coming up next?
next week we're going to talk about the Gilmore Girls and Stars Hollow. Stars Hollow is kind of like its
Ooh.
own character, and it's obviously really important to Lorelai and Rory, and they're really important to it. So I really want to dig into that dynamic of character and place within the show, because it's so core to why people love the show so much, is just how eccentric and charming Stars Hollow is. Like, there's something about
Mm-hmm.
it that just draws people to the show. So I'm really excited to dig into that.
Yeah, that's going to be a good one. Essentially, a character study of Stars Hollow in the same way that we broke down Max tonight. So please stay tuned for that one. That'll be out next Friday. But in the meantime, go back and check out some of the videos that we've done in the past. Please, again, remember to do all of those YouTube things. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, turn on that notification bell so that you can keep on getting updates and notifications of when we're dropping new content. If you want to reach us on social media, we can also be found in that way. We are on Instagram at the Gilmore Way Podcast. Twitter is what it is these days, but for the time being, if you want to find us there, we
As
can
long
be
as
found.
Twitter exists.
As long as Twitter exists, we can be found at Gilmore Way Pod. And if you want to chat with us or just give us feedback on this episode, you can also send us an email. We are the Gilmore Way at gmail.com. So please feel free to reach out to us, drop a comment on this video. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and come back next Friday when we talk more about Stars Hollow. It's going to be a good one. There's a lot to say there.
And on that note, we'll see you next Friday for dinner.
Yep. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.